What is up, everyone? Welcome to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. Make it legendary. You know, Dave and Jamey, I'm in a good mood right now. It's a feel-good Tuesday because I just put in my waiver claims. This is actually, I think, a great waiver wire week. It's one of the best waiver wire weeks in a while, assuming Tyrone Tracy is available, which he was in more than half of my leagues. I am feeling it, Dave Richard. Waiver wire week bonanza.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd go that far, but we did talk about it on our podcast, and we're going to talk about today just kind of how deep it is at wide receiver, a number of tight ends that you can stash. Can't use them in this week because they're on bye, but after that, they're going to be available. I think that there are some players out there, even at running back, that people can pick up and feel good about potentially starting this week.
Jamey, you feeling my vibes?
Yeah, we talked about it like Dave said. You know, it's one of those weeks where there's one potential difference maker for the rest of the season. There's one potential difference maker for this week. On top of that, was Zonovan Knight. There's some decent DST options. There's some decent kicker options. I think you're looking at some, good plug-and-play guys. And then the trade deadline is looming next Tuesday. And so we could see some players that are dealt this week. We already have one trade for the Rams, getting a cornerback from the Titans. If we see somebody like Breece Hall traded, then Isaiah Davis becomes very popular. We could see a tight end or two on the move, maybe Chico Okonkwo, maybe even Mark Andrews. That could open some things up for a guy like Gunnar Helm or maybe even Isaiah Likely. So there's lots of things that could be at play, and you may be making moves Thursday, Friday, Saturday based on some things that happen later in the week.
Okay, with that said, let's get into the top waiver wire priorities. One of the reasons I was so excited is because a few leagues, Jameson Williams was available. You had Zonovan Knight, Tyrone Tracy, Travis Hunter was available. We're not going to talk about necessarily all those guys because we do have a threshold of 65% rostered or less. But with that being said, Jamey, who are your top three priorities?
Yeah, it's easy to go Tyrone Tracy first. Just looking again, the opportunity for him to be the long-term starter for the Giants. Unfortunately, Cam Scadaboo out for the season. So you want to pick him up and see what develops from here. I do think Devin Singletary is going to have a role. Just keep that in mind when you spend your fab. But if you need a running back for this weekend rest of season, he's got a lot of potential. Zonovan Knight for really a one-week rental, taking on the Cowboys. He's been good in 2 of his last 3 games, but Trey Benson is eligible to return in Week 10. So Knight may go from a potential league winner because of the Cowboys matchup to somebody that you're going to get rid of next week. And then for me, it's going to be the Rams DST as the third option. Just love the setup for them taking on what now is going to be a rookie quarterback making his first NFL start, as we know that Tyler Shuck is expected to start for New Orleans. So that defense coming off a bye, again, adding to their secondary. This should be really bad for Tyler Shuck, really good for the Rams DST.
And I've got the same top 2 guys. Tyrone Tracy, who 14 games where he played 30-plus snaps, 14 or more PPR points in half of them. That's kind of where you're at with him. He's like a number 2 running back. Zonovan Knight second. I agree with you, like a one-week guy. And then I put Troy Franklin third. I was wrong on him. I thought that he was going to actually get demoted. He looked really bad in week 7, kind of got lucky with the touchdown. And what ended up happening in week number 8? Plenty of targets, plenty of big numbers. Looks like he's the number 2 wide receiver by far in Denver and could end up being a number 3 receiver for fantasy managers rest of season. So I'm okay making Franklin a priority if he's still out there. About 40% of CBS Sports leagues, he's there.
Jamey, a lot of people might have the Patriots DST, and we don't talk a lot about DSTs on this particular show, but I know I have the Patriots DST in 4 or 5 leagues, and I'm looking at the Rams DST. Patriots get the Falcons this week. What would you do?
I'd stick with the Patriots DST. Look, the Falcons have better offensive weapons, but they've been bad. Certainly last week, they made the Dolphins defense look good. So I think they'll be able to contain Bijan Robinson. This isn't a sit Bijan Robinson discussion, but I think just looking at Michael Penix, we don't know how healthy he is. If Kirk Cousins starts, I love the Patriots DST even more. So I'm not moving off of them unless you're just desperate. But I think the Patriots DST is long-standing. Their bye's not till week 14. I'm going to start them almost every week until then.
All right, so let's talk about the waiver wire running backs and Tyrone Tracy and our expectations for Tyrone Tracy. For example, if you are good at running back, do you bother with Tyrone Tracy? I have a league where I'm very good at running back, and I am putting in a pretty aggressive bid for Tracy. And then if I get him, I will try to trade a running back for wide receiver help because I do think we're looking at an RB2 here. Dave, what are your expectations for Tyrone Tracy for the rest of the season?
He's going to be a priority for every fantasy manager because when you've got running back depth, you feel wealthy in fantasy football, and it's a position which you could trade from. The position that you can get the most from in a deal is running back. So you could very easily get Tyrone Tracy off waivers. Let's say he has a good week against the 49ers. That's a defense that's banged up right now. You could trade him as soon as week 10 and then you've got something for nothing because you picked him up off the waiver wire. An expectation for him, you asked a great question on our podcast earlier today, Adam. You asked, what player does he compare to? And my answer on the show was Jaylen Warren, and I think that they're kind of the same type of player, but with Warren, I don't know how much of a red light there is for him at the goal line. With Tracy, there's Devin Singletary who could work at the goal line. We saw that a little bit last year when those were the top 2 running backs for the G-men. And Jackson Dart will run a little bit too. We don't see Aaron Rodgers running very much in Pittsburgh. So I think Warren's a little bit better. If the expectation is a low-end number 2 fantasy running back for Tyrone Tracy, yeah, everybody's going to make a play for him in every fantasy league.
Oh, boy. You hear that? It's time for an impromptu game of Who Has More? Who has more 20-yard carries this year, Tyrone Tracy Jr. or Christian McCaffrey?
I'm going to go Tyrone Tracy with 1-0.
Is that what it is?
Yes.
That's what it is.
Follow-up question. Who has more 20-yard carries this year, Dave Richard or Christian McCaffrey?
We're tied.
It's a tie. Yes, it is 1-0.
McCaffrey doesn't have a single carry of 20 or more yards.
And Tracy's was untouched 2 weeks ago against Denver.
I remember that. Yeah, that is crazy. How many 20-yard catches does McCaffrey have this year? Probably more than me. Probably more than me.
Question. He's got at least 5.
Yeah.
Yeah. But he doesn't have any 30-yard catches. What a loser. Okay,
Yeah,
Zonovan Knight. Now, Zonovan Knight has the Cowboys this week. Definitely could be someone that you're putting in your lineup if you get him. Jamey, talk about the Cardinals' backfield here because people are wondering, when is Trey Benson coming back? What kind of role will Knight have? Let's say Knight has a really big game and then Benson's eligible to come back next week. What does that look like in the Cardinals' backfield? Give me your thoughts on the Cardinals.
I think you just take it week by week at this point. So Zonovan Knight should be the guy for this week because of the matchup against Dallas. And based on what we saw Monday, they did cut Michael Carter. We do expect them to bring him back. Sounds like it's a procedural move. But clearly Knight is their featured guy for now. So Benson's eligible to return off IR in Week 10. That does not guarantee he will return off IR. Remember, when he was first hurt, they said 4 to 6 weeks. This is now Week 5. So he has, the 3 games. I'm sorry, next week will be Week 5. This is now Week 4. So hopefully by the time we get to the Seattle game in Week 10, he's ready to go and should be the lead running back. I think you're hoping for 70% of the touches. That's, I think, a good number to look at and say, okay, he'll be good enough to be a number 2 running back. Knight could still be a flex. Remember, we were talking about Benson as a flex in tandem with James Conner before both guys were injured. So I think there's still room for Zonovan Knight to help your fantasy roster. But if I'm looking at it from a fab perspective, I'm trying to get him to win me this week, or at least help me win this week. And that's really what the priority should be, because the Dallas run defense, number 2 in most fantasy points allowed to the position. There's a huge opportunity here for Zonovan Knight based on his week 9 matchup.
It's also possible that if Benson isn't at 100% and Knight goes off, let's say he goes crazy, 120 yards and a touchdown, the Cardinals coaching staff could say, okay, we're going to roll with Knight and whoever else they have for 1 more week. And then maybe you can squeeze out 2 weeks of that. I don't love that matchup in Week 10 either. But Week 9, that's the spot. That's when you want to use them.
Yeah, Week 10 for the Cardinals is the Seahawks. They allow 3 carry to running backs. Let's go through the rest of the list, Jamey. You got Tyjae Spears. You got Dylan Sampson and Tank Bigsby, who are backing up a couple of running backs who got injured in Week 8, but could be back in Week 9. We also have Isaiah Davis. You mentioned him at the top of the show. What if Breece Hall gets traded? Devin Neal with Alvin Kamara a little banged up. Samaje Perine, Emmanuel Wilson. Take us through this list. What do you think?
Yeah, so once you get past the top 2 guys, you're kind of speculating a little bit on what either could happen or what you might need for this week. So Spears is going to give you some, flex performance type numbers this week. He's been 7 or more PPR points in 3 straight games. I think he's going to kind of live in that range. He's been playing more than Tony Pollard. So if you're just looking at the Titans backfield, I'd start Spears over Pollard if you have both. But after you get past those guys, we're talking about nobody's going to help you for this week in the setting your lineup realm. But talk about rest of season. We don't know the shoulder injury, the length of absence that we could be looking at for Quinshon Judkins. It sounds like it's going to be minor, so just keep that in mind. Same thing with Saquon Barkley dealing with the groin injury, but I think you want to just stash Dylan Sampson and stash Tank Bigsby just in case. We've heard about this before. A guy goes into their bye week, things get a little screwy, come back to practice, and he's not good to go. Remember, we thought Lamar Jackson was going to come back last week. That did not happen. In the case of Isaiah Davis, we may find out by the end of this week or maybe even by the end of today if Breece Hall does get traded. Now, there's a lot of things clearly at play with that, but they do not play again until Week 10. So you got the Breece Hall showcase game. He looked awesome against the Bengals, and so did Davis. So you want to stash Davis just in case Hall is traded. but you also want to stash Davis just in case Hall suffers an injury. Braylon Allen's not eligible to return until week 11 at the earliest. So right now it looks like Isaiah Davis could be a potential number 2 running back if Hall were to miss any time or again was traded out of New York.
Okay, hypothetical time. If Breece Hall gets traded in 5 minutes and Isaiah Davis is now all of a sudden this hot waiver wire pickup, how would you rank Tyrone Tracy, Trey Benson, and Isaiah Davis, Dave Richard?
For the rest of the season, obviously, because you can't use 2 of those guys in week number 9. I might lean into Davis the most. I really do like his ability, his versatility. Could have a chance at being like an 80% of the snaps type of running back for the Jets. And the fact that he can catch the ball out of the backfield, to me, that's great. I'd put him 1, Benson 2, Tracy 3, but all 3 of them would be running backs that I'd want.
Jamie?
Benson would be 1. I just like the opportunity for him in the offense that he plays in. Tracy would be 2, and Davis would be 3. I mean, look, we've gotten really 2 good games out of Breece Hall, and it was week 1 and it was last week. And Davis now is going to be that guy in that offense, behind that offensive line. I don't know how much I want to trust him. Plus, Braylon Allen eventually coming back. I think Benson's got the highest ceiling based on what he could do. You know, we said this, you know, since James Conner really was a member of the Cardinals, maybe it coincides with the coaching staff, but it's almost on a week-to-week basis. They give you sort of that number 2 high-end flex production. You know, again, Connor's on a different level than Benson. Benson's on a different level, in my opinion, than Zonovan Knight. But they still gave you a reason to trust this spot. So I like that offense and what they produce for their running backs. And then just being hopeful that Tracy could be a little bit close to what Cam Scottaboo has been, which is 13 PPR points in every game since week 2. So Davis would be a distant third for me.
Oh, man, I don't know what Breece Hall did to you. You sold him very short.
Yeah.
He's had 4 games with like
16 or more PPR points. He's been a top 12 running back in 3 games.
And Isaiah Davis is not Breece Hall.
No, but he's going to have the opportunity plus. Like Breece Hall was at one point this year sharing with 2 running backs. If they get rid of one, now there's 2 max. One of those 2 is on injured reserve, and he's a good versatile running back. I'm very encouraged by what I saw from Isaiah Davis.
Against the Bengals.
That's true. It's against the Bengals.
Yeah. Okay, well, you could have, at least it'd be a good option, right? Be
listen, you want to have these options. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, the running backs are pretty good. What about the wide receivers? When we come back on Fantasy Football Today, actually, never mind, we're going to talk about the quarterbacks. We will eventually talk about the wide receivers, but the quarterbacks, the running backs are pretty good. But what about the quarterbacks? When we come back on Fantasy Football Today, we'll talk about
next. Good.
What's happening here?
We'll be right back on Fantasy Football Today. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. Make it legendary. And right now we're talking about waiver wire, checks notes, quarterbacks. Yes, of course. All right. So listen, there are a few quarterbacks. Dave, I'll throw this one to you. A few quarterbacks who are rostered in about 71% of CBS Sports leagues. They are Aaron Rodgers facing the Colts, Kyler Murray facing the Cowboys, and Brock Purdy, if he plays, at the Giants. If they were available, would they be big-time waiver wire priorities, and how would you rank them? That's Aaron Rodgers, Kyler Murray, and Brock Purdy.
For week 9, Kyler would be at the top of the list, followed by Brock Purdy, and then Aaron Rodgers. Rest of season, I'd go after Purdy first, and then Kyler Murray, and then Aaron Rodgers. And Rodgers has been fine the last 3 weeks, 20 fantasy points in each of those. That's in 6-point per passing touchdown leagues. But only in one game, and it was against the Bengals, did he actually get huge numbers. And Kyler's got the Cowboys this coming week. That's a game where he could have huge numbers. Purdy could potentially have huge numbers multiple times over the course of the rest of the season. We know that the receiving core in San Francisco will get healthier as well. And Purdy wasn't terrible to start the year. So that's the way that I would have it ranked. But those are in the smaller leagues, Adam. Those are in the 8-team leagues, the 10-team leagues where not everybody's really paying attention. And there's not a ton of demand for quarterback right now, other than from the fantasy managers who have been starting Baker and Jalen Hurts all year, because those guys are on bye in week number 9.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely going to be some 12-team leagues where these guys are available, and obviously on different websites, they're going to have some lower roster percentages. But, okay, for the guys who are more available, let's take a look at Jamie's list of top waiver wire quarterbacks. We got Sam Darnold, Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields. He's in a bye, but could be a good long-term play. Tua Thursday night against the Ravens. Now, Darnold gets Washington. Lawrence gets the Raiders. We like these matchups. JJ McCarthy's taking over. Could be a high-scoring game against Detroit. And Tyler Shuck, we didn't even talk about that, but Tyler Shuck has just been named the starting quarterback this week for the New Orleans Saints. So, Jamie, how much do you like Sam Darnold and Trevor Lawrence in Week 9?
Yeah, I like them a lot. I like both guys a lot. I think you look at Washington, they gave up, nearly 300 yards passing and 3 touchdowns to Mahomes. They just lost their top pass rusher prior to Week 8. So a defensive line that's depleted, a secondary that's struggled so far this season, and Darnold's had an opportunity to play at a high level when the matchups have been right. I didn't think he was going to play well against Houston. He struggled. The 2 previous games, he was over 24 fantasy points. And you're looking at a team that's struggling to run the football at this point. So I think you kind of lean into your strengths if you're Seattle and let Darnold hopefully get above 30 pass attempts. I would love to see the Washington offense make this a competitive game. So maybe we see Jaden Daniels out there to help that cause. But I still think what Darnold should offer is, to me, a little bit better than Trevor Lawrence this week, and certainly a little bit better long term. When you look at the schedule for Lawrence, it gets a little tougher after this week against the Raiders. And this is a team I think you could see the Jaguars try to run against and get their run game going a little bit as well. So I like both these guys as low-end starters, but give me Darnold for this week and give me Darnold rest of the season.
Yeah, Lawrence has the Raiders, and then Houston, who's number 1 against quarterbacks, then the Chargers, who are 5th, the Cardinals, who are 8th. For what it's worth, Darnold does have the Cardinals next week. Only 2 quarterbacks have done well, but they really haven't faced good competition. So Darnold, look, he's been super efficient, just needs to throw a little bit more. Dave, what do you think about the Tyler Shuck situation and how it relates to the entire passing game for New Orleans?
I think it's going to hurt the passing game for New Orleans. One of the best parts about Spencer Rattler was his willingness to throw deep and his arm strength. That's something that Shuck doesn't have. He's much more of a touch passer. I do like that, at least in college, he didn't really fear the pass rush very much. He was able to stand in dirty pockets and deliver short and intermediate throws. He's got good footwork. He's got good mechanics. But I worry about those downfield throws. And case in point, last week when he got a chance to play, he did target Rashid Shaheed the most out of anybody on that team. But the ADOT was low, the yards per catch was low, and it wasn't really taking advantage of all the great things that Rashid Shaheed could do as a wide receiver. And I think about those big plays that he made. I think about the big plays, although they're fleeting, for Chris Olave. And I wonder if they're just going to go away because Shuck isn't as good of a downfield thrower, doesn't have the same type of arm strength that Spencer Rattler has.
It's a Spider-Man meme. You go from one to the next, it doesn't really matter. They're going to get volume. They're going to be fine. I don't think that Spencer Rattler was the reason Chris Olave was making plays. I don't think it's going to be the reason why Tyler Shuck is going to take away from what Chris Olave does or what Rashid Shaheed does. I mean, Kellen Moore's going to give these guys opportunities. They're going to be chasing points. The run game has been absolutely abysmal. So as long as they're getting their targets, I think they'll still be productive enough. Olave maybe goes down a couple spots, Shaheed a couple spots. One's a number 2 receiver, one's a number 3 receiver. Start them the same way.
Yeah, I just look at the 3 games before last week, and Rattler was connecting on some big plays, some deep balls, and his wide receivers were scoring fantasy points off of it. But he wasn't for the first 4 weeks, so he was actually really bad in that category. So maybe Shuck can get better there. I just, as an Olave manager, it was nice to have a little predictability with Rattler back there and a little bit of upside. A little bit unpredictable now with Tyler Shuck.
Well, I don't think Shuck is going to suddenly stop throwing to Chris Olave. And this is to Jamie's point. I think the Saints can still go ahead and utilize him as much as they have been. And they can try and utilize Shaheed downfield as well. But I just feel like the quality of target on anything that's going 15 or more yards downfield will not be the same.
Okay, back to the quarterbacks for Week 9. You can look at the Niners situation, and maybe if you're desperate, if Mac Jones starts, that might be a guy. Would you guys rank him in the top 15 if he starts at the Giants?
He's just there, not far off. Again, I think this is one you just kind of wait out because Purdy's been practicing. I think they're hoping to get him back. You wonder if they'll play him just with the situation with the stadium in MetLife. Will they risk the toe getting injured again? Mac Jones can win this game, so I don't know how much they want to run Purdy back out there if he's not at 100% based on what's happened in that field. But Mac Jones could certainly be a low-end starter. Again, looking at the 2 games that he struggled the last 2 weeks, Atlanta when they were playing well, Houston one of the best in stopping opposing passing games, he should do much better against Giants.
Any hesitation, like if you had, let's say, Matthew Stafford facing the Saints or Jordan Love facing the Panthers, these are guys that we've seen big ups but also pretty low floors. Would you be looking at Kyler Murray? Would you be looking at Sam Darnold, Dave, if you had Stafford against the Saints or Love against the Panthers?
No, I think it's much easier to go with Stafford than Love, just because Stafford, if he's got Puka Nacua back, then, I mean, he's going to have a healthy receiving core other than Tutu Atwell, but I don't think people are going to be that upset about it. And it's a good matchup against New Orleans. They're not going to have a lot of pressure on him. And New Orleans, we've seen it at points this year where their run defense has been pretty good. Maybe that slows down Kyron Williams a little bit, and it does force Stafford to throw a little bit more. So there's more upside with Stafford. Jordan Love is the one that everybody kind of panics about, because anytime that there's pressure on him, he tends to wilt a little bit. I don't know how much pressure the Carolina Panthers are going to be able to put on him. He still has upside. We saw it on Sunday night to put up big numbers himself. So I would lean in the direction of those two quarterbacks than I would the quarterbacks that we're talking about picking up off waivers.
I would go Kyler, Darnold, and Lawrence over Love. I would go Stafford over all of them.
Okay. And last question for you here. J.J. McCarthy, 31% rostered. He's about to become the starter again. Gets Detroit this week. His playoff schedule is Dallas in week 15, Giants in week 16, Lions in week 17. And, it's Minnesota, and they tend to do pretty well with quarterbacks. So does anybody think J.J. McCarthy is worth adding if you don't really need a quarterback, just as depth?
If your rosters are deep enough and you're struggling at the position, then sure, you should look to pick him up. I mean, the hope would be is the guy that we saw kind of figure things out as week 1 went along, shows up. Again, when did he hurt the ankle in week 2? Atlanta's defense, very good at the time. So there's going to be a lot to figure out with this. Remember, he didn't have Jordan Addison in those first 2 games. He was suspended, so getting that piece back is a big help. Hopefully the offensive line can sort of stabilize itself and or get healthy to help him, get protected up front. But they have all their weapons available now. Aaron Jones is back, Addison's there, Jefferson and Hockenson healthy. So this is everything we thought that McCarthy can do in Kevin O'Connell's system. It's just mind-boggling to me that they had both Sam Darnold and Daniel Jones, let them both walk. And now you're talking about those 2 guys. They're not at the top of the MVP conversation, but they certainly were at one point this season, or in the case of Daniel Jones, may still be as potential MVP candidates. And now they're watching them play somewhere else.
All right. Well, I was so excited to talk about wide receivers that I tried to do it one segment early, but the time has come. When we come back on Fantasy Football Today, we'll look at the waiver wire wide receivers, and quite frankly, I'm not that excited about them, but you do need some help. I'm going to ask you guys about running back versus wide receiver when we come back, so stay tuned for that, and we'll help you out after this. Back here on Fantasy Football Today. So taking a look at waiver wire wide receivers, what I was going to ask you guys is, when you look at your leagues, do you find that your teams typically need more help at wide receiver or running back?
Mostly running back. I mean, I think with the wide receivers, we've seen so many of these guys we're going to talk about now, and some of them we talked about earlier this season, that, they all kind of fall in the number 3 receiver range. I don't think we've had a wide receiver yet that has emerged as a consistent must-start top 30 caliber wide receiver. Maybe Quentin Johnston, what he did earlier this season, but there really hasn't been somebody off waivers that has just been, oh my God, I have to have this guy, and he's going to be a consistent starter. So maybe we'll see if Christian Watson's that type of player. Maybe we'll see if Darius Slayton's that type of player, just given their upside. But you also just look at some of the other players we're going to talk about. They just feel like number 3 receivers at best.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I look at my teams and I feel like I'm usually stronger at running back, because receiver has been such a mess. Might be because I play in more 3 receiver leagues than 2 receiver leagues, but gosh, you wish there was something like a Tyrone Tracy Jr. equivalent on waivers, wide receiver, but it doesn't happen. That's why I was saying, if you're solid at running back, you should still pick up Tyrone Tracy Jr. and then try to make a trade and get a wide receiver. I'm in that kind of boat in a few leagues.
I mean, how many of your leagues did you have Malik Neighbors in, or another receiver that's really disappointed you or just isn't available anymore? Like, if you're in that type of situation, then of course you're chasing after everything off the waiver wire to try and make up for losing a stud wideout like that on your team.
Adam, before we get into the running backs, Isiah Pacheco is week to week with a knee injury from getting hurt last night. So,
and it's Buffalo week for them too.
We may be looking at Brashard Smith. Kareem Hunt's at 74% rostered. I think you look at him clearly as if he's out there, you got to go get him. And then you're looking at Brashard Smith right now, somebody you got to go pick up as well.
Wow. Okay.
See, this ended up being a running back segment after all.
No kidding. I mean, Kareem Hunt was pretty valuable last year for a little while. I have to go look at the numbers, but all right, we can get into that. Hey, real quick, who has more? Waiver Wire wide receiver edition. Who has more targets this year, Troy Franklin or Jalen Waddle?
Troy Franklin.
I think it's Franklin.
You are correct. It is Franklin.
Wow.
Who has more games with 16 or more PPR fantasy points? Chimere DK or DK Metcalf?
I think that's Metcalf.
3-2, Metcalf. Who has more games with 80 or more yards? Christian Watson or Matthew Golden?
I believe that's a tie.
It's a tie. Good job. You guys are learning. Ties are acceptable in this game.
No, they're not.
They shouldn't be. It's who has more. That means that there's got to be somebody that definitively has more than the other person.
Who makes the rules here? Okay.
You have more to learn about your game.
Jamey, Troy Franklin's number one for you. Do you know he has more targets than Jalen Waddle? Chimere DK is number 2. Darius Slayton 3. Christian Watson 4. You can start with those guys. And who are you aggressively trying to get? Who do you believe in that group, if anyone?
I believe in all of them, but I'm not aggressively trying to get any of them. I think you're just looking at guys that are number 3 receivers. Franklin this week is going to struggle against the Texans. It's just a tough matchup. And look, he's got 18 targets in his last 2 games. He got lucky against the Giants to find the end zone, and he dominated the Cowboys. And so I think this is just going to be one of those games where you don't want to overpay for him because you're going to be a little frustrated, and then you may find that the next number 3 receiver that we talk about going into Week 10, you might want to drop Troy Franklin because of a bad game, and then the schedule gets much better for him. So I wouldn't necessarily overpay for him. I wouldn't overpay for Christian Watson. While there's so much upside in what he could be, we know the story with him. He kind of just disappears at times, and he is still coming back from a very tough knee injury. So it was against the Steelers. That secondary has been abysmal as well. They lost somebody else during the game, also with Elliott getting injured there for their secondary. So I think you're just looking at these guys. Like Josh Downs was building towards something before the concussion. He comes off the concussion, scores a touchdown. You're looking at, DK. We could get Calvin Ridley back. Then they have a bye in Week 10. So there's just a lot of things at play with this group of receivers where I like a lot of them. I'm just not going to go crazy to spend a lot of fab on them because to me, it's like a lot of Spider-Man memes, just all pointing at each other and saying, I can get you maybe 10 to 12 PPR points at best without a touchdown, and if they score, you're going to love it, but I just don't think we're going to get consistent production. None of these guys, maybe aside from Watson, could be a number one, maybe Slayton as well, but, could be a number one receiver on their own team. But again, we are talking about either crowded receiving cores, questionable quarterback play, or just not consistent production from these guys across the board.
The one that would actually, in my opinion, and this sounds crazy, but it's DK in Tennessee. That's a team that's going to throw a lot. I don't see them playing with the lead in a lot of games. I think he's better than Iomanner at this point. Certainly the targets, the production would suggest as much. But Adam, you know this. Calvin Ridley has missed the last 2 games. These are the 2 games that DK has had at least 16 PPR points in. So if Ridley comes back, that could take away half the target volume that we've seen from DK over the last 2 weeks. And so I like him a lot. The talent's great. But when Ridley comes back, someone's coming off the field. It could end up being Van Jefferson, which no one's starting him in fantasy anyway. You didn't even know that Van Jefferson was even on the Tennessee Titans. But it's still a factor where DK's volume is going to go down. If that wasn't the case, then DK might be my favorite receiver and somebody who could evolve into maybe being a top 24 guy.
Yeah, he plays the slot more than 70% of his routes. So
it's true.
So he's not. I don't think he's going to come off the field for Ridley. But
no,
definitely
it's the volume. It's the target volume.
Yeah, exactly. By the way, sorry to jump around here. Kareem Hunt 8 games without Isiah Pacheco last year. He averaged 14.8 PPR fantasy points per game. Now, at the beginning of that stretch, he was getting 20 plus carries in 4 straight games, and then they stopped doing that, so he wasn't quite as good. But also, the offense is so much better this year than it was last year.
Right.
And you've already seen him take advantage of these 1-yard goal line touchdowns and whatnot. So, man, I'm thinking through my waivers right now, and I remember Kareem Hunt being available in a league. So now, okay, I'm sorry to detour from wide receivers, but if Kareem Hunt, Rashard Smith, Tyrone Tracy, Zonovan Knight are available, Jamey, how would you rank those guys?
Tracy would still be 1. Then I think it comes down to, do you need to start Zonovan Knight this week, or are you looking more long-term? And Kareem Hunt could have, again, according to this report, week to week for Pacheco. I probably would lean toward Kareem Hunt. Buffalo's run defense has been very bad. And what you see from Kareem Hunt in a shared situation, He scored 2 touchdowns last night, 9 carries for 40 yards. You know, the little pop passes that we get toward the end zone, you know, they like to use him in that regard as well. So I think there's kind of a very similar path to production for Knight this week. I like him better than Hunt, but very similar path to production. Then you get the long-term appeal. So Brashard Smith to me is the wild card because they've been trying to get him going. You know, certainly been involved in the passing game. Kareem Hunt's, 30 years old at this point. You know, does Smith now take this chance and maybe runs away with it? So he's definitely somebody you want to put on your radar as well. So I would still prioritize Hunt over Smith, but I do want to get some shares of Smith also.
Okay, other wide receivers. We'll jump back to the wide receiver waiver wire here. Josh Downs, he's fine,
Sure.
He's good. Trey Tucker.
Good analysis.
Well, I don't know what to say about Josh Downs. He could easily give.
I got something to say about Josh Downs. He's given me at least 11 PPR points in 4 of 6 games, or 4 of his last 6 games, I should say, and certainly each of his last 3 with 11.4, but only 1 game on the season with more than 13 PPR points. So he's good. I don't mind starting him anytime there's a matchup where I think Daniel Jones is going to have to throw close to 30 times. Last week was an example where he threw 29 times, and we saw Downs get a touchdown. It's going to be those high-scoring competitive games where I'll be really excited to start Josh Downs.
Jamey, how are we feeling about the 49ers receivers and the Texans receivers? Niners are at the Giants. Texans get the Broncos without Surtain and probably with Nico back.
Yeah, I think in the case of Juwan Jennings, he's somebody you want to pick up and stash just to see what happens when Brock Purdy's back. Remember, Falcons, Texans the last 2 weeks, 7 targets each of those games, did very little with it. But I think when he's healthy and Purdy's the quarterback, when Pearsall's back and Ayuk's back, it's going to be tough to trust. But I think as a number 3 receiver, at least in the short term, especially like you said against the Giants, and if Purdy's back, he's going to be somebody that I'll be very interested in. Kendrick Bourne's somebody that I think at this point you could drop. In terms of the Texans guys, I'm hopeful that Jalen Knoll has done enough to maybe take over the role that Christian Kirk had, because Kirk was not doing very much with it, and we know that Knoll's part of their future. Kirk was a 1-year rental. Braxton Berrios now being hurt, I think, opens things up for Knoll as well. Like you said, Nico Collins coming back, you got to keep an eye on what the situation is there, because if he's out, Jade Higgins definitely has some value. Xavier Hutchinson has some value. But to me, Knoll's the one that I would like to roster just to see what happens, because Kirk does not sound like he's coming back. He's yet to practice dealing with his hamstring injury coming off of their bye week. And I want to see what happens post-Denver, because the schedule gets very favorable for Houston. And C.J. Stroud with these short area passes, I think that will benefit Knoll very much. 11-plus PPR points each of the last 2 weeks.
Why don't we do a drop-o-meter wide receiver edition? I'll give you guys that are rostered in at least 60% of our leagues. How about drop-o-meter for Matthew Golden?
Yeah, unfortunately, he's droppable with Watson now back.
Yeah, 7.
Tez Johnson.
6. I don't want to drop either of these guys. I love the potential that they both have, but if I need the roster spot, or if I want to speculate on Franklin, who's sort of the same type of receiver, then I'll do that.
It's such a wild card with Johnson, because if they come off their bye week and Godwin is not back, then you're going to want to have him on your team. If Godwin is back, he could still be better than Godwin, but it's obviously another mouth to feed and more targets that he's going to lose. So if I spent a lot of fab on Tez Johnson, I will probably hold him. If I did not, and I just got him either on a waiver claim or somehow got lucky, picked him up 2 weeks ago after the first injury occurred for Godwin, then I'll probably be able to move on with him without any trepidation.
And how about Darnell Mooney?
I'm ready to move on from Darnell Mooney.
See, I would like to see what happens, because he was building towards something prior to last week, and then you get the quarterback change. And, look, I don't know if he's ever going to be a 1. He's probably better suited as a 2. London comes back, maybe that things change for him with Penix under center. So he's certainly not somebody you have to hold on to, but I wouldn't mind holding. Like, I would rather hold him than Tez Johnson personally.
Yeah, and I'd rather hold Tez than Mooney. He's playing a lot like he did when he was in Chicago. Not as many games where he's having double-digit PPR points. There's something obviously different with how he's being used compared to last year in this offense. And it could be as simple as how the Falcons are using Kyle Pitts. And maybe it's unfair to say, because we can't really judge him entirely based on last week. But I think London's still going to be the top target getter, and I think Pitts is going to continue to draw a lot of targets. That's something that wasn't happening as much last year.
Okay. And the last thing I'll say about wide receiver is, if Travis Hunter is available in your league, he is the number 1 wide receiver to go get. He is 77% rostered in CBS Sports leagues. And when we come back, we will talk about the tight ends that you could pick up for Fantasy Week 9 and perhaps beyond. It is kind of an interesting week. Some of our favorite streamers are on bye this week. So who can fill in that gap at tight end? We'll tell you after this. We've got Mason Taylor on a bye. We've got both Browns tight ends. We've got Dallas Goedert, Cade Otton on a bye. But we welcome back Trey McBride, hopefully Brock Bowers, Sam Laporta. I think probably a little bit better who's returning rather than who's on a bye this week. Anyway, Let's get right into the waiver wire tight ends. And an interesting one. Jamey's top waiver wire tight end is a guy who really hasn't done anything this year, but I totally get it. It's Colston Loveland. Jamey, why are you excited about Loveland this week?
You got matchup and 3 injuries to the Bears. So we're going to find out if Luther Burden, we're going to find out if Olamide Zaccheaus, and we're going to find out most importantly if Cole Kmet, dealing with a back injury, missed last week's game, are going to play. So there's target opportunities for him, but it's really about the Bengals. I mean, they have just been absolutely bleeding fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Number one at the position, 10 touchdowns allowed to tight ends in the last 4 weeks. It's just been fantastic. 10 for the season, 9 in the last 4 games. So it's just been an unbelievable opportunity. Got a little bit nervous last week that Mason Taylor wasn't going to keep that streak alive. Catches the game-winning touchdown from, of course, Breece Hall. So I think there's a chance for Colston Loveland to have his breakout performance in week number 9. And even if Kmet plays, again, if the other 2 receivers are out, we might see a lot more 12 personnel where we could see Loveland getting those chances. I think he's a great streamer and a potential top 12 tight end for this week.
It's a huge leap because he hasn't put up huge fantasy numbers in a game yet this year. But the matchup is absolutely pristine. It's exactly what you want from a tight end. And so when you weigh him versus other tight ends that are 10 PPR points, 8 PPR points, you might roll the dice with them. Somebody like Juwan Johnson, he's given us over 10 PPR points each of the last 2 weeks. That's great. But that's more of a floor play. And the ceiling play would be Colston Loveland. So I get exactly where you're coming from.
Okay, Dave. Colston Loveland, according to Pro Football Reference, 241 pounds. Juwan Johnson said to weigh them, 231 pounds. So it took a long time for me to set that joke up. I do appreciate the laugh there. I really needed that one. But Dave, I think on the show earlier today, you said you would go Johnson over Loveland?
I did, just because it was the safer play, and I didn't really value the matchup as much. But when you think about it, even if it's a bad game for Colston Loveland, if he catches 4 balls for 48 yards, okay, it's a disappointment. It's 8 PPR fantasy points. You're not too far off of what Juwan Johnson's going to do. And it's Juwan Johnson with Tyler Shuck under center. We don't know if Shuck is going to target him. He did a little bit in his time in the second half last week, but it's against the Rams. Their defense is going to add some wrinkles. They already have. They have a new slot corner in Roger McCreary. It's going to be difficult to expect a big game from Juwan Johnson. A safe game, 10 points, okay, fine. I think he can do that, but he could also stink too, just as much as Loveland has stunk this year, so you might as well roll the dice on Loveland.
Yeah, it's just that kind of week. Hopefully you have your tight end because it's not a whole bunch of options. Although I do wonder, what about going back to Dalton Schultz, Jamey? It's kind of in the Darnell Mooney vein, right, where Schultz, not expecting him to do what he did 2 weeks ago, but 3 weeks before that, 6 targets in each game. Is that a good option for this week?
I don't love it. I mean, Denver secondary clearly a little bit in flux because of, Surtain not being there, so that might help, especially Nico Collins is back, in terms of C.J. Stroud challenging on the perimeter a little bit more. I just don't think Schultz is healthy. He was, going through, shoulder or chest injury, even in the game where he had the breakout performance against Seattle. Then he comes back last week, he gets 1 catch, and all of a sudden he's grabbing at his upper body again. It just seems like something's off, and he's playing through it. So I don't want to trust him. Maybe you get those 8 PPR points for the floor that he's given you, but even last week, great situation, struggled. So for me, I'm almost out on Dalton Schultz. I'd be dropping him for Colston Loveland personally.
Sure, and more importantly than that, think about what the Texans did on offense last week. We thought that C.J. Stroud would just lean on Schultz going into the game, and instead he was leaning on literally everybody else. It was Hutchinson, Noel, Higgins, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's going to encourage the Texans' play calling moving forward to keep leaning on those wide receivers, get away from Dalton Schultz, because Schultz just isn't as explosive nor as healthy as those other wide receivers.
And Dave, I'll throw it to you first. If you were going to stash a tight end, so we've got Fannin, Njoku, Mason Taylor, Cade Otton all on bye, for example. Mm-hmm. could be someone else I'm not thinking of, but who's this tight end you might stash?
It would be Fannin, because not only is he in line to get a good amount of targets, even if David Njoku stays in Cleveland. I mean, think about all the wide receivers that are in Cleveland. They would kill for some of the receivers that are in Houston at this point. I think that even if Njoku's there, he's going to get a lot of work. But what if Njoku gets traded? And now it's Harold Fannin as the number one tight end and probably the number one target getter in the Browns offense. And we've been talking about how talented Fannin has been really since week 1 when he broke out. So there is a huge opportunity for Harold Fannin to be a must-start fantasy tight end. So compared to Mason Taylor, who was good late last week but was an absolute dud the 2 weeks before, and David Njoku, who, if he stays in Cleveland, still going to be a good fantasy tight end, could go to a different team, might not have the same type of role, might not have the same type of chemistry. I'll just take my chances with Fannin.
Yeah, if Breece Hall gets traded, I wonder how that would affect Mason Taylor, because he throws all those touchdowns to Mason Taylor, right? Yeah,
First touchdown he ever tossed.
I'm pretty sure Isaiah Davis could throw a pass if he absolutely had to.
Jamey, am I missing anything at tight end? Anyone else to stash?
I think Gunnar Helm is worth looking at. And same thing with Chigo Okonkwo. Both guys in their current roles, you don't really want to trust either one. But for what it's worth, Okonkwo, 8.8 PPR points or more in 3 of his last 4 games. So giving you kind of that Dalton Schultz production, that TJ Hawkinson production, Evan Ingram production. So if you've been looking at those guys and you want to pivot to Okonkwo, an easy way to go there. But there is the chance that Okonkwo is traded. Again, the Titans feels like there could be a fire sale coming, so it may be Pollard, it may be Okonkwo, it may be Calvin Ridley, if teams are interested in those guys. And then that opens up the door for Gunnar Helm to get more work, a guy that's clearly going to be a part of their future. And in the case of Okonkwo, if he does get traded, maybe he goes to a spot where they can actually feature him a little bit more than just the 4 or 5 targets he's been getting based on what he's averaging. So I think it's worth looking at the Titans' tight ends in deeper leagues.
And like I said, with Travis Hunter at wide receiver, go get him if he's available. Oronde Gadsden is the equivalent of that. If Oronde Gadsden is available, he is obviously by far the best tight end to pick up. In fact, in a league where I have George Kittle, in a separate league where I have Trey McBride, I put in claims for Oronde Gadsden. You just want to get these good players. They could be flexes. You just want to get these guys on your team. We're going to answer your questions when we come back. Thank you guys always for reaching out with your questions, and we'll see what you're asking about and what your ad drops are when we come back. What's on your mind? Brett, we'll start with you. Yeah, you it doesn't seem fair, does it, Brett? 4.5 points from Bijan Robinson. You know what, though? You did pretty well for the first 7 weeks. So obviously, yes, you should quit fantasy football. But keep listening and watching to our shows. All right, what's next? How much fab are we spending on Chimere Dike or Troy Franklin out of 500 left? Dave.
I don't know how much you started with, but 10% of whatever you started with is the absolute max that I would spend for either of these wide receivers. I like them a lot. I think that Franklin's got potential. I'd want to be patient with him. Same thing with DK, but you shouldn't have to spend a lot to get them.
Next. Thank you, Scott. Is it worth holding either Cade Otton or Isaiah Davis through the bye?
Absolutely. Again, we could find out that Breece Hall's traded before the Jets take the field again in Week 10. And Cade Otton, based on Mike Evans not coming back anytime soon, even if Chris Godwin does come back, I think has the potential to be a low-end starting option. So if you can carry both, I'd carry both. I would prioritize Davis over Otton, though, just based on what the upside could be. Once we get past the trade deadline next week, you can move on from Davis, just unless you want to just make sure he's the handcuff to Hall.
Ooh, do we have time for one more? By the way, add Hail to Henry is pretty gutsy name there. Oh, this is a long one here. If you need a player long term, it is. I guess
Fannin
is
at the top of this list. Davis would be second, and Bigsby would be third.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Although thin at running back. If you want to be risky, you can drop Pollard and pick up Davis. With the Titans having a bye next week and Pollard not probably going to do very well against the Chargers. So, if you want to go that route, maybe Davis could be a league winner for you if he takes over for Hall.
All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll talk to you next time. I'm Adam Aizer for Dave Richard and Jamey Eisenberg. Have a great day. Talk to you next time on Fantasy Football Today.